If you ever wonder why I choose to review older games from my backlog, it's because I am, as Reddit describes it, a patient gamer. That means I usually don't have 60 to 70 bucks of disposable income to buy a AAA game at launch, which means most of the time I don't get to be part of the conversation during launch date when most of the buzz of the game is. Cyberpunk 2077 is one of the few exceptions, and that is thanks to a friend who was kind enough to get me the game so I could get to experience it at launch with everyone. And let me tell you, despite having its fair share of issues and being one of the most disastrous game launches in recent memory, I actually had fun with this game. But no matter how much I enjoyed it myself here, it won't change the reality that CDPR higher-ups were overconfident enough to believe they could produce Rockstar levels of quality with only a fraction of Rockstar's staff, and an even smaller development cycle. The core of Cyberpunk's issues is that they released this game 2 years too early, while actually entering production properly 4 years after announcing the game. This is a beta rushing to the market before the developers were able to fully test, optimize, and ironing out, all while revealing they are not the friendly neighborhood developers the internet made them out to be. Now, with the basic context out of the way, I won't spend time talking about the technical issues of the game. Trust me, there's already countless hours of video detailing them, among with the broken promises of the marketing. So instead I'm going to focus on what you are actually playing. So let's see how much of the content of this game can stand on its own. In Cyberpunk, we play as B, a young person looking to make a name for themselves in Night City's criminal underworld. B's origins, backstory, and appearance can be fully customized by the player, and each of the 3 life paths come with their own perks and little lore that can fit what kind of protagonist you want B to be. But you do want to be careful, because outside of the clothes, B's appearance cannot be changed once you start the game, so you have to choose wisely. Once you are done with either of the 3 prologues, you find yourself in an open world that to me felt like a mix of Deus Ex, Far Cry, and The Witcher. In fact, I can't help but notice this game may very well be futuristic Witcher, with how much DNA from the franchise it has. Now, regardless of what you choose to do with B, the core of Cyberpunk's main quest has been attempting a heist that goes horribly wrong, and leaves them with a race against the clock, a grand conspiracy involving the Arasaka Corporation, the horrors of what really happens in the underbelly of Night City, and a man named Johnny Silverhand. From there, you got about 3 different quest lines on how you'd like B to tackle their problem at hand, each one actually playing a part on how many endings you're going to be able to choose from, and it's not like they are missable, as the game will warn you about a point of no return. On the other hand, the side content is divided into several categories: the contracts you do for the several underground fixers of Night City, along with the side stories that deal with the leftovers of the 3 main quest lines, and the police scanner activities. To deal with each activity is where this game really shines for me. You can either go in guns blazing and shoot everyone in the face, you can rush enemies with a katana, you can be stealthy and slowly take down enemy guards, or you can use your wits and slip by in any gap between enemy patrols, or you can safely hack everyone from a distance and walk right in once you remotely eliminated everyone. I will forever be a sucker for open gameplay like this. The fact that you can approach most of these gameplay missions however you feel like it, with some of them having multiple outcomes, makes it feel like you're the up-and-coming badass looking to take over the city. Getting to choose a strategy you feel comfortable with, or one you can find more fun and challenging, is a type of freedom you don't get too often in games. And despite what some critics say, I will dare compare this kind of stuff to Deus Ex, at least on the surface level. It feels less like an open world, trust me, we'll address this in a moment, and more of a collection of small sandboxes. In some instances, you can avoid combat altogether and simply bribe or interrogate someone for the objective you need, and that also feels really good because it is your path and your choices, even if sometimes said choices can be confined to their own little quests. Now, remember I said there is Witcher DNA in the design of this game? You can see this in the form of the fixer contracts. B will take on these jobs, and the fixers will tell you often that a bonus can be given to you if you do things a certain way. Funnily enough, you do wind up fighting crime and rescuing people far more than police itself. Most assassination targets do end up deserving what they get, and only rarely do you find yourself questioning whether you are doing the right thing or not. And as if you needed more confirmation of how witcherish those parts of the game feel, you can even call for your car to come to you. While on the topic of the cars, the driving is something you're going to do a lot in this game. Night City is a huge place, and you do need to drive around every place at least once if you wish to unlock the fast travel stations, and there is plenty of them. It's too bad there's not much else about the driving. You will think you could engage in some cool car chases, but the reality is that the driving is just like the police system, barely implemented before it got pushed out. I was not kidding when comparing calling your car with calling for Roach in The Witcher. It covers the super basic need to travel and you can't do much else, not even a drive-by, which would have been super useful given how often you can get into a shootout near the ropes. Of course, this is me picking out the good things in this game. Even if it was released in a fully completed state, I can't help but notice their ambition to try and emulate a Rockstar open world came with its own set of lows. And that's, of course, the police scanner missions. I think this is where the game gets really compared to the likes of Far Cry. While the fixer contracts do have their share of repetitions, they all ultimately have their own self-contained stories with their own outcomes. For the police scanner, however, there is really no excuse. Spread around Night City, there's 156 of these. And there is supposed to be 4 types of these, except you're not going to notice too much of a difference. Either you are going to save somebody from getting assaulted by a group of criminals, you can attack a criminal hideout and find out the location of a hidden stash, you take down a number of enemies and take their loot, or you enter an enemy-occupied area and kill a wanted criminal. That's just about it. It's more of a source of quick cash and maybe a way to test out new guns or gadgets without worrying about any consequences. But after a while it gets old, really old, and it doesn't help that's about all you can really do in Night City. While CDPR insisted that this was going to be a massive, living, breathing open world, it is, as I said earlier, more of a notion of small sandbox levels for you to mess around with. There are no collectibles, and while there are some Easter eggs here and there, there's really not much else for you to explore or interact with that isn't scripted out in a quest. Which is a shame because Night City is one of the more beautiful open world maps I've ever gamed on. They really wanted this place to be as much eye candy as possible, and I will dare say it is seriously immersive. Whether you are walking the streets, hanging out inside clubs or other buildings, drive around the desert, or just enjoying the view from a high point area, the sights here are really something to behold. If I am to advise you something about this game, is to not bother trying to play it like an open world game. The police system is pretty bare bones. It is one of those parts of the game where you can tell they ran out of time to properly implement it. At least the parts that did make it into the game. Not that it was much, mind you. I had my most fun focusing on doing every other mission there is to get, and also having fun spending time with these characters, because they are pretty entertaining to hang out with. Having B bantering with the people of Night City can be just as entertaining as doing the missions themselves. Now, if only they had included the super basic feature of ending a conversation naturally. For context, when you start a conversation with a character in The Witcher, you will have an option to say goodbye after you discuss the things with the NPCs or bought something from vendors. In Cyberpunk, for some reason manners died. There's no way for B to say goodbye to the people he's talking to, and you can tell this was another thing they couldn't finish developing, because all the NPCs react negatively when you walk away from them, even if you exhausted all their dialogue options. On the note of the quest, do yourself a favor and avoid beating the Brad, unless you're doing a melee build, that is. In fact, avoid fist fighting if you can. Unless you invest in the Gorilla Arms upgrade early on, your opponents in that questline are completely broken against you, and they will one-shot you no matter how much you upgrade yourself. It is the only quest where I ended up lowering the difficulty, because it was that much infuriating to suffer through. Now, there is another thing to address, and it is the claim from some critics that your choices don't matter. They are kinda right and kinda wrong. Almost every questline has multiple endings and can be completed or failed depending on your choices. But the deal with them is that those choices are isolated within their respective stories, but they are not going to have any impact or be reflected in Night City itself. The main quest of the game is going to eventually lead you into the same place no matter what you choose, but the choices on how to proceed from there and their respective variations do rely on what you decided to do during them. But that's actually fine by me. If I can go into many of these missions having approached them however I like them, stuck with my own dialogue choices, and then look back and realize it was all my own doing with my own strategies, then that was a quest that left me satisfied. I actually don't mind that type of storytelling because it's leaving what I do up to me instead of having a scripted branching path that will lock me on a certain route. It's a quote-unquote makes you think type of situation, and it works wonders if you get invested into the story. That is subjective, of course. I know plenty of people will have preferred more meaningful choices, but I am still pretty happy with what I got. What might not be very subjective is how the upgrade system works. Remember, this is an RPG after all. You have your multiple leveling meters and you have your skill trees, and it is the most remarkable skill tree I've seen in a game. The problem with the skill tree is that the majority of the skills are small and passive, and don't make too much of a difference unless you commit to a certain type of build. The core abilities themselves are good to level up because they will have an impact on what we can do in-game, opening certain paths and even unlocking unique dialogue options related to the skill when the time comes. But as I said, the rest of them are minor upgrades, dedicated exclusively to certain classes, and with the combat being spotty at times, you get the idea. Too many of these skills feel like they were cobbled together at the last minute, and with the level cap set at 60, you don't want to end up wasting those precious skill points. There is also a crafting system, but it is painfully redundant. For the early hours, you will wonder why your guns are making much damage, and that's because you want to get guns with decent stats that you can consistently upgrade. That's the entire purpose of looting and crafting. You might as well disassemble everything that is in food and just invest it on your weapons. You might even go the entire game and not use the system at all, and you will hardly notice a difference. This is also because the crafting system is tied to the skill trees, so if you really want to have a chance of upgrading an iconic weapon or a certain item of yours, you better be investing on those crafting upgrades. Speaking of the crafting, there is one more thing I wish they had spent more time polishing, and that's the inventory system. Don't get me wrong, it is nice and it's serviceable, but if you are looking to keep certain weapons and upgrade others, then we have a problem. Because the game has a looting system, you might find yourself picking up a lot of guns. Guns that you can either sell or dismantle for the crafting system. Sometimes you'll get so many of them that you will accidentally dismantle or sell a gun that you were originally using, or lose an iconic gun without noticing until it is too late, and you either cut your losses or will have to reload a save file from hours earlier. They could have easily benefited from having a lock system for the inventory, so you can mark certain weapons and items as favorites, or simply lock them so you don't accidentally sell them. It's just one more mark of jank for this game. In its current state at the time of this recording, Cyberpunk is a pretty good game, but it's also far from ideal. While it ran decently from me, I can acknowledge that it is not well optimized. A properly optimized game has consistent performance regardless of which hardware it's running on. And with all the shallow open world and some other technical shortcomings, this is not a game I will personally pay full price for. I appreciate the story and the type of game the developers wanted to give us here, but the higher-ups at CDPR were seriously deluded if they thought a massive marketing campaign and abusive crunch hours will have tired and burned out developers that deliver something on the level of The Witcher 3, let alone a Grand Theft Auto game. Under better circumstances, this game will be a near perfect 10, but given its current state, I'm gonna have to give it an 8 out of 10. This game is a sad testament to how corporations are not your friends, and is yet another cautionary tale of what happens when gaming companies grow complacent and convince themselves they can produce great games just by virtue of their name. I would probably revisit this game in the future, see what major patches they bring to the table, and if the special edition the company has been touting finally puts this game into a more acceptable condition, because this is seriously something we should have been playing in 2022. They made the greatest mistake of their careers by announcing the game before it even entered production, only to actually make it in barely half the time since they said they will make it. Regardless, I still feel this game is janky, but it is also a good and fun kind of jank. It's gonna depend a lot on the PC community, but I can see this becoming similar to Stalker or even Skyrim, where an otherwise janky commercial product is polished into a cult classic by an active modding community. I'm not sure if this has any chance on happening, but you know what they say, a man can only dream.